This is Tim Lackey. I'm building this Michalak designed AF4G, a 21-foot plywood skiff to use in the shallow creeks of Chesapeake Bay. This time I install all the bottom panels with screws and epoxy. Thanks for clicking on this video, and I hope you enjoy it. I applied a first coat of fairing filler to these external butt joint seams just to bring that up more or less flush. That's not a final finish yet, but tried to keep it nice and fair with either side of the hull. Did that in all 4 locations, 2 per side. And then with the epoxy that was left over, I just went around and did a first fill on the various screw holes for holding the bulkheads in and so forth. I was careful not to fill the holes holding in the temporary frames. It's just a fairing mix, usual fairing mix, and a wide trowel. And there will be more work on this later, but this is just a first coat to get it more or less level. So this all looks good. I've got this all unclamped, these chine logs. Gone around and done a quick check. They're all nice and flush across the bulkheads and frame locations. I've got a couple of little areas to address where the plywood is a little high. Here's one. Just a quick trim, sanding on that to bring that down. I'm going to cut these flush at the stem and stern. This is another area. This is the starboard bow. It's a bit high here. I think the piece was just a little tall. This is the piece that I traced and cut. So it's probably just a little bit larger than the one I traced. That's why this is like this. So I'll trim that down. And then these chine logs need a round over on both outer edges so that I can glass over them and just make it a nicer profile, and just a little touch-up sanding. So that's the general what's going to be happening here. Wasn't that just awesome? The place where the router totally screwed up because the bit got loose and edged its way out is exactly where I have the camera. So lucky you get the great coverage here. Did this damage to the edge of the rail. Fortunately, I can just epoxy that. So I've done some sanding and shaping. Got a little carried away on these chine rails. I realized as I was way into the process that I should have left the top edge square till the plywood was fitted, because the plywood's going to come out and be flush with the outer edge right here. And I've also rounded what's going to be the top edge. I've shaped the stem, removed the excess material, put a nice rounded profile on those edges, cut off the excess and put a little shape on the forward end. Not sure 100% if that's finished, but that's where we are for now. Sanded all these spots in the hull that I filled, just a real light sanding. These external butt joints need a little bit more fairing work before the boat is sheathed. You know, these were flat originally. They now have a little curve, so you know, to just fill from side to side and leave it flat, that's going to be a flat spot in the hull. So these need to be shaped so that they follow whatever curve is actually here. It's not a big deal. It's just something I'm keeping in mind as I go through it. This top section will get more attention once I turn the boat over later. For now, I don't need to work upside down to make that anything other than it is. But otherwise, this all cleaned up well. These look good. And then the starboard side is the same. I also cleaned up the aft end, cut them flush with the transom, cleaned up these transom corners, put a little round on. There'll probably be a little more prep later, but that's the bulk of it. But as far as I know, the next step now is to actually start the bottom. And the bottom is 5/8 plywood, 15 millimeter okume, and the sheets go crosswise starting at the stern. So the 4-foot dimension of the plywood runs this way. So the 8-foot dimension runs across the boat, and you basically just put them in place and mark them and cut them. So I believe that is where we are. I've just got to look at a couple things and make sure that we're ready for that. But I think that's it, and that's going to be nice. So let's get going on the bottom. In order to get the plywood on, I moved the center line braces down to what's the top of the hull, which is down at floor level here. I've got them all clamped in place. This is the forward edge of bulkhead 2 that I'm looking down at. You can see the right side of that board is right on the line. If you extended it out, it's not going to show right on camera, but it would hit the center line of the stem. Got it clamped here on the aft side in line with the line. And then it's clamped to the temporary frame and to the center line of the temporary brace across bulkhead 9.5. And then it's clamped to the other board, which then runs aft to the transom on the other side of the line. So I've got boards clamped from stem to stern now down at this level. So that clears the bottom in order for me to put the plywood on, except for that stick that I have sticking up. And that's just so I could transfer the center line on bulkhead 12 down. And then between the transom and 19.25, I have this piece clamped in from underneath so I can get to it later. So everything is centered according to those boards, stem to stern, and the boat's level. I've leveled it at the stern, leveled it amidships where the level is now, and I've leveled it forward. Midships, it took care of itself. There's nothing, I didn't have to do anything there, so there's no twist in this. The bow, I did shim a little bit. I actually did that before, but I've fine-tuned it now. So this is all set to start laying out the plywood on the bottom. This is the panel layout for the bottom. It uses 5.5 sheets of 5/8 plywood. Starts at the stern, the full sheet, 3 full sheets. Then there's a half sheet, and that's designed to avoid the butt plates and the bulkheads so they don't interfere up in that part of the boat. And another full sheet, and finally one more. And then there's some other parts that come out of this. To start out, I marked the stern about 4 feet forward. I'll let the sheet overhang the transom by a little bit, so I made a mark just under 4 feet forward, and that way I can line up the sheet on both sides of the boat when I put it in position. I've got the first full sheet positioned here. I did some measuring back and forth. I wanted to see on the drawing of how these sheets are laid out. It actually has the sheet hanging over the stern by quite a bit, and I couldn't figure out why. It also talks about there needing to be a narrower sheet up forward to avoid the frame and butt joint locations. But I did some measuring, and this works out well to basically line the sheet up at the aft edge of the transom. There's my mark. Sheet's right on that line on both sides. And fortunately, this keeps it nice and square at the transom. Got the same, just a bare overhang here on the bottom. And it's the same on both sides, so that's heartening because it means the boat is appropriately square. So this is just confirming that the layout was good. And once the bottom goes on, it's going to lock this hull shape in for good. So I took a little time first and made sure that everything was the way I want it. So I'm going to trace this sheet out along the rails. I've minimized the overhang on this side to minimize waste. And then on the other side here, I've let it hang out as long as it needs to. And I'll trace this and cut this out a little outside my layout line, and this will all get trimmed later. But this layout should give me, it should keep all the seams well clear of any structural members. Here's 4 feet, well clear in between these members. Here's the next 4 feet. So there's plenty of room forward of this bulkhead to do a butt joint, which is going to be fiberglass just like on the hull. Then another 4 feet forward is approximately here. And then one more sheet. So I don't know I don't understand the 2-foot sheet. If I can use 4-foot widths all the way across, that's what I'm going to do. As I get up here and see how it actually falls into place, literally, I'll adjust if I need to. But so we'll see how this goes. First piece of the bottom, all trimmed to fit. I've left it an overhang on both sides. So later I can come and trim it flush with this chine log. Roughed out some lines for screws. These are in the center of one of the laminations. Screws will basically just be holding it while the epoxy cures. They'll be permanent, but they're not crucial to this structure. The epoxy is the key thing. I've routed out the 1/2 of the shallow slot to accept a layer of biax tabbing, just like I did on the hull here. So this will end up flush on the bottom when all is said and done. And then to hold the next sheet on here, I'm going to temporarily attach a couple planks from underneath that'll span the gap and help support the two ends together. So this is ready to glue. I've got it clamped in place. I'm going to unclamp one side and glue underneath and screw it in place and then do the other side. Seems like the best way. There's no way to easily glue the whole thing and drop the sheet in place without making a mess. So I think just like I kind of did on the bulkheads, one half at a time. We'll get a good heavy bead in there, and then I'll crawl inside and clean up any squeeze out that's on the inside. I want plenty of epoxy on here because it's kind of important. Here's the scene from inside the boat. Squeeze out, lots of it, everywhere. Pardon the bad filming, it's tight in here and I'm not going to take a lot of time. So I got to get this cleaned up. But yeah, good squeeze out. So I had this much squeeze out on the outside as well. That's what I want. I've got it on this bulkhead here all the way around. So I'm going to clean this up now. Okay, I've got the inside of the boat cleaned up now. Take another second and get some film here. I was very careful to get all the stuff out of these limbers. This is bulkhead 19. Pardon me while I reposition. It's tight in here, it's not fun. I had excellent squeeze out on the front side of this bulkhead, and the bead was on this frame. So I still got squeeze out on the back side, the aft side, which is good, even though the bead was quite a ways forward of that. And this is the starboard side. I had good squeeze out there. I cleaned that all up, and then I've cleaned up carefully all the way around the transom. This will all get filleted again once the boat is turned over. Put a nice fillet in and possibly some tabbing, and like along the hull sides. I haven't decided, but I think so. So I've got this cleaned up really well. Let's take a walk around the exterior of this first bottom panel. It's all epoxied and screwed in place. I've got screws roughly every, 8-10 inches. It's what I needed to pull it in tightly. Screws aren't important otherwise. But I've got enough that I made sure I pulled it in tightly, and you saw the good squeeze out everywhere. Just 3 screws in the bulkhead. So it was a flurry of activity. Did both sides and then cleaned up. I knew I had time to get to the squeeze out before it cured, but I couldn't waste any time either, so. The second panel goes over a temporary frame, and I'm just being careful not to get too much epoxy right in next to that so that that can come out later. Underneath to hold this seam together, temporarily I've put up these cleats. They just span the gap between the two panels. It looks like a huge gap there, but it's really not. They're pretty tight at the top edge. Anyway, that'll get filled with epoxy later, but got 3 of these, and they just hold this flush at the seam. This is going to get glassed later, first from the outside where I routed that groove, and then later from in here. And here's the inside of the seam. Lots of squeeze out. Okay, time to clean up. Got this all cleaned up on the inside. And here's the other side, the starboard side. Nice clean joint. This will get filleted and maybe tabbed later. This is where there's a slight gap because of the angle of the top of the plywood, which is at a 6-degree angle compared to the flat bottom. So there's just a tiny gap there. That's what you see. All filled with epoxy. All right, focus. Come on. So I've come inside with the sheet clamped on top in the right position. I've come inside and I knew I was going to lose focus because it keeps losing focus in the dark here. There we go. So I've come inside and traced out these structural members. You're just going to have to live with the focus. So imagine that I'm showing you a line in that blurry mess. I'm just not going to fret with it because it's just not doing what I want. I don't care. Anyway, I traced out these structural members inside just to give me a good idea. What I'll do is that when I flip the sheet over, I'll actually drill some pilot holes through so that I know where to locate the screws coming into these bulkheads from the middle of the sheet. There's also quite a bow between the two sheets, which I knew there would be because that second sheet is completely unsupported at its forward edge. So I'll pre-attach the cleats. The third bottom panel is now in. That was a struggle. Not a struggle, it just was a lot of work to be done in a short time because there's 2 major bulkheads beneath this that needed to be epoxied and coated with glue and screwed and cleaned up and all of that, plus the sides. Plus there was getting this seam flush and level in the center because this second panel is completely unsupported in the center. The temporary frame is way back here. It's not screwed to that at all, so this part tended to sag a little. So it really had to be pulled up into position with this forward panel. So I used these couple boards on the top side to pull it together first, and then I added some more from underneath. Here's the inside of the most recent bottom piece. I'm at the aft end here. Got some blocking across to pull that seam more or less flush. Cleaned up all the excess. And then the forward part, I leaned on the aft temporary frame. You can see it broken right there. and it broke off. And I knew I shouldn't lean on it, but so anyway, it was a flurry of activity and back and forth and inside the boat and outside the boat, and I didn't really enjoy it. So I'm glad to have this one on with 2 key structural bulkheads secured to it with glue and screws. You know, that's a major panel, quite frankly. So I've laid out the last 2 sheets of 5/8 plywood here on the bottom because I wanted to see what I have to do. The specs call for cutting one of these in half the long way into a 2-foot wide piece and using it between stations 8 and 10, which would be the section from the forward side of the 3rd piece that I installed. So it has me cutting it and using that, and that's actually an offcut, theoretically an offcut from the final piece. These are the pieces that have to come out of the remaining 5/8 plywood. But I've laid out the 2 full sheets. I've got no problems with where these seams are. They're all accessible. What the specs say is that this is designed to prevent interference with bulkheads and frames and so forth, but the way this lines up, there's no interference. And what I really think it's about is maximizing use of materials so that you don't need a full sheet to cover, for example, this tiny little piece. This is what I have left of 2 full sheets. And what I'm inclined to do is go with the full sheets. And then this one, I'll use a small piece of scrap to cover this. And I can get in here because of that opening I cut in bulkhead 2. And I don't see any reason not to do it this way. The only other big thing that comes out of these panels is the top of the motor well. And I think I'll have enough for that. And if not, I will splice 2 pieces of scrap together. And the only other parts that come out of these are small. I'm going to do these 2 sheets because I just don't see any reason not to. And I see lots of reasons why I should. Fourth panel now in place. 4 full panels so far. Been good. You can start to see the shape of the boat, or the shape of the bottom rather, curving up. Comes to me here. Got 1 more full panel and a tiny piece to finish this off. So I was going to use this scrap. This is the offcut from the piece behind it. And this will work, but it got me thinking. It's under 4 feet across at the seam. I've got a whole sheet here. So I only need a few more inches, like 52 inches, 51 inches. I'll go 52. That way I can finish this in 1 more piece. Only 1 more seam. I won't have to worry about a seam up here. To me, that's a no-brainer. And then I can use my various scraps to make the outboard well. I'd rather put a splice in that and do that. That'll be easy. I can do that on the bench. But to finish this off with 1 more piece, it'll be just over half of this sheet. And while what's left isn't going to be wide enough to do the outboard well on its own, that's okay. I've got lots of good scraps, including this one. So, okay, that's what I'm doing. last piece of the bottom in place. Sorry for the shadow, I got a light on. Helps it focus, plus it helps me see. Scrap in the center just to help hold that seam flush. It actually was staying flush all on its own, but I put that in just because. And then up forward, I could reach in there and clean that up. This worked out great. Really happy with this one final piece thing. And then all the way aft, there's the main bulkhead there, and all the way aft through the cockpit. So the bottom is fully planked after 3 separate days. Still work to be done, obviously, but all the panels are in. Looks great. We'll let these final 2 cure overnight, and then the next step is to plane, sand, and otherwise shape these overhangs so they're flush with the chine logs, and then shape a round over on the top corner. So that'll be the next thing. I let these overhang a little bit so that I could trim them exactly. So I've got that work to do all the way around. And then I need to install 1 layer of 6-inch biax tabbing on all these seams, 4 seams. It's got a nice shape. You can see the swoop of the bow. And once this is flipped and in the water, the chine log's not going to look quite as funny as it does now. But I'm thrilled to have that sheathing all on. I've got half a sheet left, or just under half a sheet of that 5/8. I changed the way it was put on a little bit to better suit me. Got plenty of scraps. I can make all the final parts that I need to out of this. And the only big piece that I need this 5/8 for is the outboard well. And I'll just glue up a piece out of whatever scraps. You know, I'll seam it just like I did with the hull and the bottom, so I can make it up out of scraps, and that'll work fine. Much better to have a full piece on this bottom. So I'm real happy with this, but the bottom is on.